Hi, welcome to Wordsmith Academy. This is a quick introductory session just to get you familiar with some of the basic concepts and ideas that are important to know about if you want to start to learn about legal AI. The first is foundation models. You will have heard of these everywhere, but this is what companies like OpenAI are building with ChatGPT, or Anthropic are building with Claude, or Google with Gemini. These are huge, important algorithms that each of these companies has their own version of. To create these algorithms, they put billions of documents and web pages and other bits of information through, and over time, they learn how to predict what the next word in a sequence should be. So if somebody puts in a simple question, it breaks that down, and then it reconstructs an answer based on what it thinks is most likely, based on all of the stuff that it's seen before, which is kind of how we as humans work, just in a very, very advanced way. Each one of these companies has a different type of algorithm that's doing the learning and a completely different data set that's feeding into it. So you can already begin to see it, that different models are becoming really good at different things. The ones from Anthropic are becoming great at code, or maybe the ones from Google are becoming very good at certain types of research and reasoning, or OpenAI is at certain types of logic, etc. But each of these has different nuances, and each of them have different characteristics. So the first and important question to understand is, what is that model being trained on? And even at a high level, this can kind of be problematic. So if you remember, recently we had this issue where there was a lot of controversy around DeepSeek, the model that came out of China. There, the accusation was that they trained on input and output data created directly by an OpenAI model. So there were all sorts of follow-up questions around copyright and IP protection, etc. So it can kind of be helpful, and I think over time this will become a much more audited part of every single foundation model, is having a clear, accountable input so that people understand what the process has been used to create that output. If we move on to the next section, which is how your data fits into that. Let's exclude anything that you've put on the internet, which you can assume right now has probably at some point been touched by a foundation model. And let's look more at the stuff that stays within your company or on your laptop, your private data. This can be used in several different ways by an AI application. One, you can actually train your own lightweight versions of an LLM, and there are different ways to do that. That's something that very few teams will be doing for a number of reasons. Largely, it's just impractical. The second, and one of the most used use cases of your data, is what people refer to as RAG, or Retrieval-Augmented Generation, which basically means you have a bucket of your information, and before the AI gives you an answer, it will search that, find a few relevant bits, and then blend it into its thinking before it gives an answer. The third method of your data being used is injecting it into the context window, which is a really long way of saying, in real time, telling the AI what it should know about. So if we think about an AI as another human, the first model is, what did you learn when you were at school, which is kind of your training data. The second model, RAG, is what can you go and find in whatever library books you have access to. So you don't know about it in real time, but you can go off and you can check a book and find out. The third way is, what have you been told in this conversation that you should factor into your thinking? And that's what we call the context window. So each one of those different methods allows your information to be included in different ways. The next fundamental thing that you need to have a bit of a grasp of with legal AI are the kinds of capabilities that it unlocks beyond one of these foundation models. There are several ways that companies are deploying this tech nowadays. The first is that they're focusing on really specific use cases, which means that they're connecting the AI to different products and tools, etc. Two, they're putting different types of data in those three different methods of injecting it that I mentioned before. So they might be feeding extra instructions into each prompt, or they might be keeping a big body of legislation that you can RAG or search against when you ask a query. And in some cases, they're even fine-tuning, or they're sort of retraining very specific models to do very, very narrow tasks like redlining. The other method that teams are starting to use this stuff is that they're not just tweaking the kind of input and output that you're getting from the AI, but they're starting to connect it up to different products. That means a lot of people are putting it into, say, Word or into Slack or into email, and they're weaving together workflows that make it seamless for this to be injected at precisely the right moment in precisely the right format. One of the big problems that we see with many, many legal teams is that they like to have a lot of control over how those answers or how that AI is presenting itself to the rest of the company. So there's a lot of work that can go into creating workflows that make it easy for the AI to make a suggestion, for legal to yes or no it, and then for it to go out. Now, within all of these, there are several different players and pieces of the ecosystem. We've talked about two of them so far. We've talked about the foundation models, OpenAI and Anthropic. We've talked about what we refer to as the application layer, which would be companies like Wordsmith that are building applications on top. And then you get what's called the infrastructure layer, which you'll hear a lot about as well. This would be companies like NVIDIA that are producing chips or H100s, etc. Those are typically used by the foundation models to do a lot of that training and do a lot of that basic teaching of the algorithm. Now, there's a lot of nuance to each of these ideas, and what we're going to do in the Academy is break these down for you and go into more depth, predominantly on the application use cases, so the ones that relate to legal AI specifically. That doesn't mean it's not helpful to understand these other ones, because often when you're thinking about where your data sits or how your data is moving, it's really, really helpful to know where the application layer sits, where the foundation layer sits, and how the data moves between them. But our core focus in this course is going to be on the application layer and what legal specific products are doing. So I hope you enjoy it, and thanks very much for listening.